Rome did not lose those legions because a patrol took one wrong turn in a hostile forest. Rome lost them because it trusted the wrong man so completely that by the time the empire understood the trap, it had already closed. That is why the story still hits so hard. Not just because thousands died in rain, mud, and confusion, but because the disaster began long before the first attack. It began in confidence. It began with Rome convincing itself that the North was no longer a true frontier, only a difficult province in the making. And inside that illusion stood Arminius, a man Rome had trained, rewarded, and trusted. He was not the simple legend later centuries preferred. Arminius had lived inside the Roman system. He had served with Roman forces. He knew how Roman officers judged risk, how Roman columns moved, how Roman discipline held together, and how it could begin to fail once weather, ground, timing, and fear all turned at once. He did not defeat Rome by guessing. He defeated Rome by understanding it. Arminius was born among the Cherusei beyond the Rhine. But Rome did not only fight such peoples. It divided them, bargained with them, recruited from them, and drew ambitious local elites into its orbit. Arminius was one of those men. He spent crucial years under Roman influence and rose high enough to become exactly the kind of frontier noble the empire wanted to trust. And for a while, that illusion looked convincing. Roman armies had pushed deep into Germania. Forts appeared, roads cut through the landscape. Military pressure was being followed by taxation, legal authority, and imperial order. On paper, this looked like progress. Germania was not fully pacified, but it looked close enough for confidence to take over. That confidence found its perfect representative in Publius Quinctilius Varus. Varus was not a fool. He was something more dangerous, a successful imperial official who believed Roman authority worked because, in many places, it usually did. Punish resistance, reward loyalty, impose law, collect revenue, elevate cooperative elites, turn uncertainty into administration. That was the Roman pattern. But Germania was not a place that surrendered so neatly to paperwork. It was wooded, scattered, politically fragmented, and full of loyalties that shifted faster than Roman administrators could understand them. Rome looked at that complexity and saw a temporary inconvenience. Arminius looked at it and saw a weapon. Better still, he had the perfect mask, a German noble with Roman rank, Roman experience, and direct access to the governor. To Varus, he looked like proof that Roman rule was taking hold. In reality, he was preparing one of the worst defeats in Roman history. Varus was not marching toward an obvious great battle. He believed he was moving through territory that was largely under control, on his way to deal with local unrest. His force was strong, but it was moving in the vulnerable shape of an army that expected difficulty, not annihilation. There were legionaries, yes, but also baggage, animals, servants, and camp followers. Arminius and his allies fed the Romans exactly the kind of information they were ready to believe. A disturbance here, trouble there, a reason to shift course. Nothing that sounded like the collapse of Roman certainty. That was the brilliance of the trap. It was built not only around terrain, but around Roman psychology. It depended on confidence hardened into habit. The legions marching with Varus belonged to one of the most formidable military systems in the ancient world. In open ground, under coherent command, Roman infantry was terrifying, but none of that power was magical. It depended on order, cohesion, and enough space for command to function. Once those things began to disappear, Rome was still armed, but it was no longer fully itself. The forest took that away. The route led the Romans into rough country, narrow tracks, wet ground, dense woods, and worsening weather. Rain mattered, mud mattered, visibility mattered. These were not decorative details. They were the mechanism of destruction. Once the Roman column stretched across broken terrain and mixed soldiers with baggage and civilians, its power began to bleed out. Men could not easily form. Signals became harder to pass. Units lost contact with one another. Shields grew heavier in the rain. Movement slowed. Confusion spread faster than commands. Rome still had weapons. What it was losing was shape. Then the attacks began, not as one clean clash, but in bursts. Missiles from the trees, sudden strikes on exposed sections, pressure without a clear front. The Romans did what Roman soldiers were trained to do under stress. They tried to restore order. They tried to regroup. They tried to rebuild the structure that made them dangerous. That is what makes the defeat so devastating. These were hardened troops trying to force discipline back into a battlefield designed to dissolve discipline itself. And the enemy understood exactly how that recovery process worked. That is where Arminius becomes more than a rebel leader. He was attacking Roman habits. He knew how much space they needed to deploy, how vulnerable they became when the marching column lost integrity, and how much their strength depended on visible control. He was not simply fighting Roman soldiers. He was fighting Roman method. He was using Roman logic against Rome. Imagine what that did to morale. Some men in that column had probably known him. Some may have trusted him until the betrayal became impossible to deny. This was not just an ambush. It was the moment Roman certainty turned poisonous. As the days dragged on, danger became ruin. The Romans were trapped inside a moving collapse. Every mile cost more men. Every attempt to restore order was answered by terrain, weather, and renewed attack. At some point, the command structure itself began to rot. And once an army stops believing control exists somewhere above the noise, defeat turns into disintegration. Varus eventually chose death over capture. That decision tells you how finished the situation had become. What followed was not just defeat, but erasure. 3 Roman legions were effectively destroyed, along with auxiliary troops, attendants, animals, equipment, and standards. A legion was not a temporary crowd assembled for one campaign. It was an institution with memory, symbols, identity, and honor. To lose 3 in this way, under guidance from a trusted ally, was a wound to Roman self-belief. And then there were the eagles. Those standards were not decorations. They were sacred emblems, the visible soul of a unit. Their capture turned military disaster into spiritual humiliation. When news reached Augustus, the shock rose to the top of the Roman world. Teutoburg did not simply kill soldiers. It cracked inevitability. Rome had spent generations building the feeling that its expansion was the natural direction of history. In a few days of reign, fear, and betrayal, that feeling was badly damaged. Later ages wanted Arminius to become the pure liberator of a future nation. The truth is less neat and more interesting. He did not unite all Germanic peoples into one lasting political order. He led a coalition in a fragmented world against an empire that had mistaken influence for control. His victory was immense. It was not simple. Rome did strike back. Under Germanicus, Roman forces returned to the ground of disaster and found the remains of the fallen years later, scattered across the landscape. These campaigns restored some pride and proved Rome still possessed terrifying reach. But they also exposed the limit Teutoburg had revealed. Punishing Germania was one thing. Fully digesting it at acceptable cost was another. That is the real strategic consequence of the forest. Teutoburg did not magically decide the fate of all Europe, but it forced Rome to think harder about what conquest beyond the Rhine would actually cost. Expansion there no longer looked inevitable. Rome remained strong. But after Teutoburg, strength no longer felt the same as certainty. And Arminius himself did not receive the ending legend prefers. He was killed in the political violence of his own world, brought down not by Rome, but by rivalries close to home. That strips away the last layer of heroic simplicity. The man who buried Rome in the forest was not a mythic outsider. He was a product of entangled worlds, Roman and Germanic at once. That is why the story still lands so hard. The forest was not just a place. It was blindness made physical. It was overconfidence given mud, rain, and trees. Rome did not merely lose men there. It lost certainty. And empires can survive bloodshed more easily than they can survive the sudden discovery that their own system has produced the mind that knows exactly how to break them. In the end, Arminius did something rarer than killing Romans. He made Rome feel mortal in a place where it expected obedience. He turned imperial method into vulnerability and proved that sometimes the most dangerous enemy is not the stranger outside the frontier, but the man standing inside your confidence, waiting for the forest to close.